All right, I will say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem, beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. All right, wonderful. Well, so let's begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our TALMUD TORAH sponsors for the month of Adar. Teri Czinn for dedicating all of his Shuman Drushos this month in memory of Teri's father, Dr. Kahn, Tzvi Hirsh, ben Yosef HaKohen. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating the Shuman Drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandfather, Zechariah ben Zechariah, and grandmother Dinah bas Dov. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors and not in the sponsorship, nishmas Moshe Aharon Alter, ben Yosef Binyamin, on the occasion of his first yartzeit, and nishmas Sara Deena bas Elimelech. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today's Sima and Saeed Haken for dedicating the learning in all of the tragic karbanos of Klal Yisrael this past week. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD TORAH, their nishmas will have an aliyah, and the merit of Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will usher in an eternal period of peace and shalom for Klal Yisrael and for all mankind. So with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed Tes 39. We are picking up in merit Hashem on Lamed Ches Amud Beis 38b, and we are picking up Amalei Ravina Merkaz Ravashi, right? 3 lines up from the bottom. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit. If you remember again, we had an interesting statement, or Machlok between Abaye and Rava. So Abaye said as follows: if a person eats a chartzon, we'll go with the definition of chartzon being a grape skin. Person goes ahead and eats, grape seed. Person eats a grape seed, they're lokeshnaim. Person gets 2 sets of malchus. Why 2 sets of malchus? 1, for the specific prohibition of eating a grape seed, and number 2, for the general prohibition of mikol, right, anything that comes from the vine. Mikol asher yaseh migefen hayayin. So we'll say, so this is a bayishita that in general, anything, in other words, any prohibition that the Nazir is over, he's almost always inevitably going to be over on 2 isurim, 1 the specific isur, and 1 the general isur. Rava disagreed with this, because Rava went ahead and said, Elokin alav shebechalos. You can't get malchus on a general lav. General lav, fine. Rav Papa raised a kasha on Abaye, and Rav Papa pointed out the case, ultimately again, of a Nazir who went ahead and violated multiple things, right? And if you notice again, the Brisa only gave him liability for 5 sets of malchus. 5 sets of malchus. So Rav Papa essentially says to Abaye, if you're right, he really should have gotten what? Malchus, 6 sets of malchus. Why 6? 5 for the specific prohibitions that he violated, and a 6th for the general prohibition of Mikol Asher Yaseh Migefen Hayayin. The fact that there's only 5 and not 6 indicates to us, says Rav Papa, that Abaye, you're wrong. Abaye counters, right? The Gemara says, ton of a shear. No. When the Brisa says 5, the Brisa didn't include all of the things for which you're liable for. So Rabbi says, so now we're trying to figure out, in order to make the claim of ton of shear, you have to identify at least 2 things, right, that the Tana left off. So one of them could be the lav shebechlalos, but what's the other thing? To which the Gemara says, Amalei Ravina Merkaz Ravashi, B'hashir de bein habeinayim. So Rabbi said, this is very interesting. But the Brisa left off. Rabbi said, bein habeinayim, listen to this. Here's what we've established, right? If a Nazir eats a grape, Rabbi said, right, what are you chayiv for in a grape? So what have we established? You're chayiv for zug, grape skin. You're chayiv for chartzonim, grape seeds. What else are you chayiv for? Everything between the skin and the seeds. That's called the bein habeinayim, right? Like the meat of the grape. So I will say, if you take a quick look at the Rush says as follows. The Rush says, "Hashir de bein habeinayim, hainu mashi yish bein chartzonim vazag." So I will say, the part of the grape, it's so interesting, we've been focusing on the seeds and the seeds and the skins. So the stuff that is between the seeds and the skin, kideparish le'el, v'lo ke'alav mishum v'ad. Now, I will say, now the truth is, there's an additional prohibition. So what's really fascinating, I will say, is if you eat a whole grape, it sounds like, what are you chayiv for? It's incredible. What are you chayiv? Right? You're chayiv for zug, grape skins. You're chayiv for bein habeinayim, the flesh. You're chayiv for chatzonim, the seeds. I say, by the way, all one little grape. right? One little grape. Rabbi Papa saying all these different prohibitions associated with it. So the Gemara says, that's not in the Brisa. That's not in the Brisa. Rav Papa lo tanya midi chamesh. So Rav Papa says, you know what? The truth is, I recant. I retract. Right? Don't say that the Brisa said you're chayiv 5 times. So the Gemara says, what's going on over here? Vaha, top of lamates, vaha, os vechamesh. But that was the whole point. In other words, Rav Papa's whole kasha on Abaye was that the Brisa said you only get 5 sets of, not only, you get 5 sets of malchus. That was, Rav Papa's entire kasha was based on the number that the Brisa gave, and the Brisa seemingly omits the lav shebechlalos. So I'll say, if the Brisa is not going to have the number 5, which is the whole kunz of the kasha, then what's the kasha that Rav Papa is bringing? So we'll say, listen to this. Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, Ana savri lav gimara hi biadei. So we'll say, Rav Papa said, the reason I questioned Abaye was because I did not think that Abaye had a true tradition, a Gemara, from his Rebbe about his position. However, v'hadrabe, right? V'lo yedana the Gemara hi biadei v'lo hadrabe. I originally thought that when I posed my question to Abaye didn't really possess a sincere tradition about this from his Rebbe, and therefore, when confronted with the Brisa, he would retract. But now that I realize that Abaye does have a true Gemara, a true Mesorah, ultimately again for his position, I retract my question. Fine. So if Rabbi say the way the Gemara essentially ends off is with a more yesodistic machlokes in Abaye and Rava, namely, do you get malchus on a lav shebichlalos? So do you get malchus on a general lav? And again, at least we're going to keep hyper focused on Nazir. So I will say that's a big ramification, because what that would mean is when you violate a tenant of Naziros, how many sets of malchus do you get? So at least again, so I'll point out, by the way, this goes on both ends, right? So in general, again, is it mean if you eat a grape, you're going to get a machlok, you're going to get machlok, you're going to get malchus for whatever part of the grape you ate, plus from mikol asher yaseh migefen hayayin, or not. So Abaye says you will, lokin alav shebechlalos. Rava says, in lokin alav shebechlalos. Shabbos says, so what's interesting is the Rambam in Hilchos Naziros, Perek Hey Halacha Ches, writes as follows. He says, Nazir sha'achol kizayis anovim, kizayis chartzon, kizayis zog, kizayis simukim. So he talks about over here, if a Nazir ate a whole bunch of stuff, right? He ate a kizayis of grapes, a kizayis of grape seeds, a kizayis of grape skins, a kizayis of raisins, a revius of wine, all these different things. He gets malchus for every single thing that he did. Right? So you'll get malchus for grape skins, you'll get malchus for grape seeds, you'll get malchus for grape busser, right? You'll get malchus for everything. For everything. Makes sense? Because they're each articulated as an independent lav. Shekol echad mehen belav echadu. Listen to this. Now, look at the Rambam, right? He says, Veloke malchus shishis. Watch this. The Rambam says, you'll get a 6th set of malchus. Why? Mishum Lo Yachel Devaro. Fascinating. So Rabbi say the Rambam holds like Rava over here in this case, namely that Mikol Asher Yasem Gefen Hayayin is not an additional lav. But the Rambam does hold, and this is fascinating, that if you violate your Naziros, you're going to get malchus for whatever the particular infraction, plus the fact that you're in violation of Lo Yachel Devaro. What does Lo Yachel Devaro say? What does Yachel Devaro? Don't profane your word. Now, where is that stated? By Nedarim, right? So, by the way, according to the Rambam, you're going to get that lav, you're going to be in violation of that whenever you violate your neder. That's not unique to Naziros. What he's just pointing out is that halacha lamaisa, whenever you're in violation of your Naziros, you're also in violation of lo yachal dvarabosei. It's a real Musar Haskell if you think about it, that there's a lot written in the Sifrei Musar about the psychology of chait. Why do people sin? Okay, so it's easy to say, gaiva, taiva, kavod, right? Gaiva, everything is about me. I just want to make I'm a pleasure-seeking person because it's all about my happiness and comfort. Taiva, I can't resist my temptations. And kavod, which is kind of the same thing as gaiva, right? So I want to say, but what's very interesting is, if you believe the concept that people are good at their core, which is what we believe, I want to do the right thing, so why is it that I commit averus? Why is it? I will say, I think deep down, it's often because we think that our actions don't matter. In other words, I'll do this, and it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. In other words, whatever the effects are, they're going to be localized, and there's not going to be any type of ripple effect or ramification. Anything I do doesn't really matter. And I will say what's fascinating to me is, like, you see a Rambam like this, and what is the Rambam saying? Here it's one little act. And look how one little act has ripple effects, right? See here, I'm a Nazir, I violated the tenet of my Naziros. Okay, fine, right? So we'll say, you know how it is. Sometimes you just have to have that grape, right? So sometimes, no matter what the ramifications are, you just can't hold back. What's fascinating is the Rambam says, yeah, by the way, but it's not just about the grape. It's not just about the grape. There are also other ramifications. Lo yachal dvaro. Now, I will say, if we condition ourselves to think that kind of like throwing the rock into the pond, that there's a ripple effect that comes out. Every single thing we do, there's a ripple effect. When a person commits an Avera, says the Rambam, it's not localized. It's not the pshat that it's just you and that's it. There's a ripple effect that goes out. And what that ripple effect is, who knows? Now, the beautiful thing is, whatever is true with Avera is true 100 times over with a mitzvah. Same thing, I would say, often we don't seize our opportunities to do mitzvahs because we don't necessarily think that they matter all that much. But if an Avera has a ripple effect, you're not only chayiv for Naziros, but you're chayiv for lo yachal dvaro. If it's true l'ra, then it's certainly true l'tov. If we take advantage of our opportunities, the impact that positive things, that mitzvahs, Talmud Torah, chesed, it's not just on us, but the ripple effect it has on our family, the ripple effect that it has on our community, the ripple effect it has on Klal Yisrael is just as dramatic as well. Incredible. What says Kovaiter? So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah Omer, Amar Rabbi Yosef, remember again, the last machlokes in the Mishnah was, what's the definition of chartzanim and zag? So remember again, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said, chartzanim are grape skins, zag is grape seeds. Rabbi Yossi said, chartzanim are grape seeds, and zog are grape skins. Am Rabbi Yosef, Kiman, Metargeminan, Mi Purtsanin ad Itzurin. So I will say Unkelos on the pasuk of Chartsanim ad Zag. How does Unkelos translate Chartsanim ad Zag? Literally, Mi Purtsanin ad Itzurin. What's the definition? I will say Purtsanin means like Pnimius, the inner part. Itzuran means the outer part. So I will say, in accordance with who does Unkelos translate the pasuk? To which the Gemara says, Rabbi Yossi. And I will say, if you notice, by the way, already the Gemara adopted Rabbi Yossi as we're going through the sugya. That chartzanim ultimately means grape seeds, and zog means grape skin, which I will say is also fascinating, the way the Torah describes the grape. Right? How does the Torah describe the grape? How does the Torah describe the grape? From the inside out. From the inside out, which I will say is fascinating because, I don't know why intuitively you would assume that how would the Torah describe the grape? How would the Torah describe the grape? From the outside in. You will say perhaps there's an incredible Moshe Haskell on this as well, which is interesting. So why does the Torah describe the grape from the outside, from the inside out? So I will say, if you think about it, by the way, it's such a contrast with Naziros. Right? Listen to this idea. What's Naziros? I will say, what's Naziros? Naziros is a person adopting extreme behaviors in order to what? In order to go ahead and change the core. Right? That's what's happening by Naziros, right? Haroa sota bekalkula. Someone sees something terrible occurring. What do? They adopt this extreme behavior. But what's the goal of extreme behavior? To shape the panemius of the individual. And by the way, this is in line, we mentioned this last night, the Chassidus Chabura. This is in line with the Sefer HaChinuch. Acharei pulos nimshachos halavavos. Sometimes what you do is your behaviors have to shape how you feel. That's all what Nazir says. Nazir says behavioral modification in order to affect internal change. Now let's say perhaps like HaKadosh Baruch Hu was telling the Nazir in a nuanced fashion is, this is not really the right derech. What's the right derech? Mechartzanim ad zag. The real derech is change the way you think, and ultimately that will shape the way that you behave. Change should take effect from the inside and ultimately spread out from the grape seeds to the grape seeds. I was saying, we did this last night. This is the derech of the Piagetzna. right? The derech of the piagetz, the b'nei machshava tova, is create and change the way that you think, change the way that you look at the world, change the way that you look at yourself. And ultimately, again, that will shape the way you behave. So I will say it's this incredible interface. So the Nazir, once again, the Nazir who adopts extreme external behavior in order to affect internal change, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him this message, Sheifala, don't eat the grape, don't eat the grape. And by the way, how shouldn't you eat the grape? From the inside out. Mechatzanim ad zag. Because what you're doing, I understand why you're doing it, but that's not the best way. The best way is change yourself on the inside. Change the way you think. Change the way you look at the world. Change the way you look at yourself. And ultimately allow that change to shape ultimately the way you behave. An incredible nuanced message from the Ribono Shel Olam. I'll say Mishnah. Stam Nazir Islam Yom. Great case. Stam Nazir says 30 days. Okay, we've seen this many times before. Gilach. I will say, so listen to this. Let's say the Nazir accidentally cut his hair, or for that matter, again, by the way, could be accidentally or intentionally, or he was shaved by listim. Okay, I would say, just understand, like, so we look at this it sounds like a hazing over here. I say, unfortunately, right, the Jew over time is one of the ways in which the Umos HaOlam ultimately, again, have exerted their negative influence on us is by shaving the payas of the Jew, by shaving the beard of the Jew, by shaving the head of the Jew. So Lamais, again, so he was shaved by listim. What's the halacha? Soser lamed yom. So we'll say this is very important. So what do you lose? So what you lose is 30 days. 30 days. I will say, essentially what the Mishnah is teaching us is, in order to bring the final offerings of Nazirus, you have to have hair growth of at least 30 days. So if you cut your hair sometime during your Nazirus, right, intentionally, unintentionally, purposely, right, whatever it was, you did it, somebody else did it, Lemaisa, you cannot conclude your Nazirus unless, of course, you have 30 days of growth. Nazir, Shegilach ben Bezug ben Betar Osha Sif Seif Kol Shu Chayiv. Similarly, a Nazir who cuts his hair, we'll say Zug are scissors, Tar is a razor, Sif Sufra, we'll say, means you pluck out hairs. You pluck out hairs by hand. Halacha l'maisa, you're chayiv. We'll say that is a violation. That is a violation, right? Because a Nazir is not permitted to remove hairs off his head, and therefore halacha l'maisa is going to be chayiv. Fine. So we'll say that's halacha. Then we'll say this is absolutely fascinating. Listen to this. Ibaylehu. Hi Mazia. Milatachas Shabi o Mile'el. Listen to this shaila. The Gemara says, when hair grows, does hair grow from the base or does hair grow from the tip? Right? We'll say this is the shaila. Right? In other words, we know hair grows longer. Where is the growth taking place from? Is it grow from the not the base? What do you call it? The pore? Roots. Follicles. No, but it's a hair follicle. The part where it's attached to the head. No, that's the root of the hair. I think it's a pore, no? Yeah. Okay, whatever. Right? I'm sorry? Bottom and top. Good. That's excellent. Good. Keep it easy. Good. Keep it easy. So I would say, so does the hair grow from the bottom or the top? Good. Easy enough. I would say, so the Gemara says, one of these interesting, I would say, can you imagine like the guy who asked this in the base medrash, right? So I would say, so the Gemara says, so l'may nafkamina, right? Who cares? Now I will say, now watch this. So l'may nafkamina, l'nazir shegilchu listim, b'shayru bo kedei lokof rosho li'ikara. So we'll say, listen to this. Let's say it's the case of Mishnah. Let's say this guy's a Nazir, Reuven's a Nazir, and what happens? Someone came along and cut his hair. Someone cut Reuven's hair. But, let's say now, what's the but? They left, their hair is long enough that you could bend it over. Right? In other words, that you could take the hair and essentially the tip of the hair, could touch the base. So his hair was cut, right? Obviously his head wasn't shaved. His hair was cut, but the hair itself is still long enough that halacha l'maisa, the tip could touch the base. So what's the halacha? I will say, well, watch this. If you say ultimately again that hair grows from the bottom, then Rabbi Nazirus hashakle. Then ultimately, I will say that what ends up happening is that halacha l'maisa, that growth that took place during the Nazirus, that was removed. that was removed, and therefore again he would have to let his hair grow out again. Eli Amrit Mila El Rabbi, but I will say at the end of the day, if you say that hair grows from the top, my da'aktish hakoim, then I will say that means that what the Nazir consecrated, because again I will say, what did the Nazir consecrate? His hair at the time of his neder ultimately is still intact. I will say, see, you hear the shaila. If you hold that ultimately, again, hair grows from the bottom, so then when they cut his hair, ultimately, again, they cut off the hair that was consecrated. But if you say that hair grows from the top, then that which he consecrated at the beginning of his Naziros, ultimately, is still intact. To which the Gemara says, Tashma meha. So we'll say, let's analyze this from here. Very interesting, we'll say. So listen to this. Inva. We'll say, Inva is a knit. Right? Inva chaya dekaim be'ikva debeinsa. We'll say, if you notice, a live knit, right? A live knit always nestles itself at the base, right? At the bottom, at the root of the hair. Rabbi, that was saying that if you say that hair grows from the bottom, then what should happen with the knit? Then ultimately, so we'll say, if hair grows from the bottom, then what? Then the knit ultimately should rise up, should be elevated together with the hair growth. The fact that the knit nestles itself at the base and remains at the base would seem to indicate to us that where does hair grow from? Hair grows from the top, not from the bottom. To which the Gemara says, the olam milatachas Rabbi, not necessarily. Hair can still grow from the bottom. Va'agav chiyusei nachas va'azal inba. He'll say, but rather the knit itself chooses to constantly climb down the hair and nestle itself by the base. Okay. Tashma, what's another case? Inva mesa, a dead knit. So bereisha debensa, ultimately, finds itself, right? A dead knit could often be found at the top of the hair. Milael Rabbi, and if you hold that hair itself goes ahead and grows from the top, then beikva debensa baila mekam. Then ultimately, again, the knit should remain at the base. To which the Gemara says, no, Hasan nami mishum deles bechela sharuge shariga va'azil. So we'll say it's very interesting. The Gemara assumes the reason why the knit normally finds itself by the base is because it moves there. It chooses once the knit is dead. Ultimately, again, it falls, because remember again the assumption is that it's the top of the hair that is weighed down, and therefore Allah Chalamayisa, that's where the knit finds itself just by dint of gravity. Okay, Tashma. So we'll say there's an interesting case. Mi bluris to kushim. So we'll say there's an interesting case from the bluris of the kushim. And we'll say, what's the bluris of the kushim? If you take a quick look at the rush, so we'll say, so the rush is on the bottom, about 7 lines up from the bottom of the rush, in the wide lines. Mi bluris shakushim. The rush's girsa is goyim. Heels the bloris is the goyim. So we'll say, so what is the bloris? Shemagdilim bloris l'shem avodas kacham. Now we'll say the bloris essentially was like a ponytail, but it was a unique kind of ponytail, because what would happen? They would shave their heads. And just leave like this ponytail. I will say, you know where you can see this? It's a mefurish scene in the 10 Commandments, right? If you remember again, this is how the Egyptians looked in the 10 Commandments, right? They all had, which by the way, they must have taken, I don't know, maybe that was really Egyptian culture. I don't know if the Egyptians had bloris. But as I remember they had that, who was Pharaoh in that, Yul Brenner, right? Remember? I'm the only person who watched the 10 Commandments. I saw it on a trip to Eretz Yisrael. It was right. So that's right. That's bloris. So now listen to this. So he says, so now watch this. Here's the chap. Ukashay mistaprim migalchim saviv rosham umashay manichem osim osam kemikaliya. So they would shave the rest of their head, leave this patch of hair, and they would make a ponytail, essentially like a long ponytail from this piece of hair. Ubizov kliya kalfi arosh osim kesher kedei lios hakliya kayamo kashem gedilim v'holchim rafa kesher samoch l'sear ve'inu mahadi kibitchin. I will say now watch this. So we want to bring the following raya. When the Goyim would make this bloris, what happens? They'd shave the head, they'd grow out this hair, they would braid the hair very tightly. Now I will say, now what would happen over time? Something very interesting. The area of the hair attached to the head would become loose. Now I will say, now what does that seem to indicate? That growth is occurring where? at the bottom, at the base of there, because what's ended up happening is the hair grows out, so the hair that's growing obviously is not in the braid, so it gets loose where the braid is attached to the head. That would seem to indicate that halacha l'maisa, ultimately again, hair growth takes place from the bottom, to which the Gemara says, not necessarily, hasanami, Aidi dikamta hi mishchiva rafia. To which the Gemara says, no. In reality, the reason why that gets loosened is because the Gentile sleeps on the braid. So as a result of sleeping on the braid, moving on the braid, that's why it gets loosened by the hair, by the base. But that's not necessarily a raya that growth takes place at the base of the hair and not at the top. Tashma, boss, I was still trying to prove this point. Tashma, miskarta derafi amra milatachos. So we'll say Visanya, Vesud Kat Savi, Savia Dikina. So this is actually very interesting. So the Gemara says a raya for this is Meister Behema. So what's what happens on Meister Behema? You take a sheep, right? We know we put them in the pen, small opening, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Sheep number 10 comes out. What do you do with sheep number 10? Right? A little brush of paint. It will say, what happens to the wall that's painted? What happens to the wall that's painted? It becomes stiff and like, what's the word? Stiff, comes stiff, and as a result of the paint, right? So what's interesting is, but if you go underneath that wool, you go into the wool of the sheep, so over time, the wool underneath the paint is very soft. It's very soft. So what does it seem to indicate? That where does hair grow from? It grows from the base and not from the top. So I'll say that's the lashon over here. Misikra derafi amra milatachas. Right? Ultimately, again, even though the sheep is painted, derafi amra milatachas. Ultimately, again, the wool underneath it is soft, which would seem to paint a picture that wool, that hair grows from the base. V'tanya, v'sanya v'sukat savi sabya dikin. I'll say another example of this is when old men color their beards. Right? What do you see? I'll say it's interesting. Right? Old men color their beards. What do you see? Chavron ikvi nemehon. They are white at the roots. They are white at the roots. In other words, sometimes when you dye your hair, old men dye their beards, right? You can always tell really that they're actually gray or actually white by looking at the roots. So I'll say, what does that tell you? I'm Lamed Testament base 39b. What does that tell you? Shema mina milatachas Rabbi Shema mina. So I'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that hair grows from the roots and not from the top. Incredible. Now, one second. We'll say. So let's go. How do we get into this entire discussion? Because again, remember again, what's the Mishnah's case? The Mishnah's case is a situation ultimately again of where somebody's cutting the hair of the Nazir. Right, someone's literally cutting his hair against his will, or whatever, cutting his hair with his will, right? But lamaisa, but with his consent. But lamaisa again, the shaila was what happens if they cut his hair, but they left off enough to be able to bend the tip of the hair to the base. Now, so we're asking again, what's the status? So now we've established that halacha lamaisa, when you go ahead and hair grows from the base. So now let's circle back. But that's what you learned in the Brisa. Nazir shegelchuhu listim v'shayru beikadei lakov rosha liikaro eno soser. So Rabbi say, what did we learn? Watch this. What did we learn? A Nazir whose head was shaved by listim, or I should say his head was shaved. His hair was cut by listim. And now what happens? I'll say, but they left over enough hair, right? Or I should say, they gave him a trim. Right? But the hair is still long enough that what can you do? You could bend the top of the hair to the bottom of the hair. What's the halacha? Eino soser. This does not go ahead and demolish or destroy the neder nezirus he has observed. But one second, it doesn't make sense. Milatachas Rabbi, but I will say 1 second. If you hold that hair grows from the base, then I will say, what should be the halacha? Listar. I will say, why? Because if hair grows from the base, I will say, then when they give him a trim, what have they done? They have taken away the hair that he was makdish at the time of his nazirus. So you're both saying, here's the whole chap. If you say that hair grows from the top, so here's something interesting. What does that tell you? What would that tell you? When he became a nazir, what happens at the moment you become a nazir? You're makdish the hair on your head. If hair grows from the top, even if they give him a little bit of a haircut, what's the good news? That the hair that he was makdish at the time that he took his neder nazirus is still intact. Okay, but now we're saying no, hair grows from the base. Well, if hair grows from the base, I will say, but pashtos, what that means is they removed the hair from his head that he was makdish at the time of his Nazirus, that he became a Nazir. And yet, the Brisa says that trim does not go ahead and destroy his Nazirus. But why not? Why not? What's going on over here? Shabbos is very interesting. Kigon, shagilchu achar malos. Oh. I will say, what's the case of the Brisa? Fascinating. What's the case of the Brisa? When did they give him, when did the listim give him a forced haircut, Rabbosai? After the duration of his Nazirus had already come to an end. Wow. So let's just take a simple example over here. Reuven became a Nazir for 30 days. 30 days are now over. What happens? Now the listim give him a forced haircut. So now watch this. Umani, Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer say? Da'amar kol achar melos zayin soser. Both say we've seen this position before. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that halacha l'maisa, once you finish the duration of your nazirus, if something happens. Now, by the way, the something could be a variety of things. The something could be either a tumah, as we'll see in just a moment, or something could be a haircut. Once you've finished your neder nazirus, if something happens, the most you have to wait, or the most you have to observe is 7 days. 7 days. So therefore the Gemara is suggesting a brisa that says that if a Nazir had his hair cut by listim, but they left over enough to go ahead and bend over the hair from the tip to the base, that halacha l'maisa doesn't, it's not soser than Nazirus. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Because Rabbi Eliezer, and when is it taking place? After the conclusion of the neder Nazirus. Rabbi Eliezer said if something happens after the neder Nazirus, all you have to do is observe 7 days. Now where does he get this from? Shabbos says, interestingly enough, fine, where does he get this from? So my time, Rabbi Eliezer, Yolif taglachas tara mitaglachas tumah. Shabbos says he learns out ultimately again the haircutting of tara from the haircutting of tumah. What does this mean? Ma taglachas tumah shiva, af taglachas tara shiva. Shabbos says, now watch this. Rabbi Eliezer says like this. Shabbos says, Rabbi Eliezer's paradigmatic case was in the case of tumah. What was the case of Tumah? The Nazir finished his duration of his Nazirus. Right? So Reuben is going to be a Nazir for 30 days. He finishes the 30 days. Then Rabbi say, then what happens after the 30 days? He becomes Tameh. What does Rabbi Eliezer hold? It's not social the Nazirus. Rather, what does he have to do? He has to observe 7 days. Rabbi say, Rabbi Eliezer's obligation to observe 7 days is not unique to Rabbi Eliezer. What are the 7 days? That's the 7 days of Tumah. In other words, that's the halacha. You have to observe 7 days. Again, with hazah, rice sprinkling on days 3 and 7. Rabbi Eliezer says the same way that halacha l'maisa, you have to observe 7 days for tumah, you also observe 7 days for tara. What's the example of tara, Bosai? That's our case over here. Where, let's say again, Reuven is a Nazir, and what occurs? Somebody comes along and cuts his hair. Someone comes along, cuts his hair, and therefore halacha l'maisa, he has to observe 7 days prior to going ahead and offering up his karbanos. Which the Gemara says, "Af taglachas tara shiva v'kim luhu l'rabbanan." If you take a quick look at the Rush is on the right hand column, about 9 lines in. Af taglachas tara zayin im gilchu listim la'achar malos. If, let's say again, listim went ahead and shaved his head after the close of the Nazirus, Kodim havas karbanos, before he brought his karbanos, masha taglachaso shiva yamim. He goes ahead and he waits to do his official haircutting 7 days. The kim luhu l'rabbanon, and the Rabbanon have established kol zayin yomin asya mazya kadei lakof rosha liikaro. Chazal felt that over the course of 7 days there's going to be enough hair growth that the hair will grow long enough to allow the tip to touch the base. Sefer Rabosai, very interesting. So halacha l'maisa, the Gemara is assuming over here that this entire thing is reflective of the view of Rabbi Eliezer, which we'll talk about halacha l'maisa, but a very important area. Rabbi Eliezer of the opinion, once you close out your neder nazir, so when we say close out, that means once you've observed the requisite time, and the only thing you have left is what? Is the offering of the karbanos. The most you could lose is 7 days. So if you become tameh, 7 days. Somebody cuts your hair, 7 days. But essentially, according to Rabbi Eliezer, is once you've observed the actual duration, that's locked in. The only thing that could happen is a delay as to when you're able to offer up your concluding karbanos. Incredible. The Bible says, go a little bit weiter. Again, we're going to see whether or not we pass in that way halacha l'maisa in just a little bit. We'll see a little bit in rest in the coming week. So Gemara says as follows: Nazir shegilach bein betar bein v'zog osher sisei kol shechos. Remember again, what else do we establish in the Mishnah? When it comes to hair cutting, however you're cutting your hair, you are going to be chayiv. So whether it is scissors, razor, or plucking out hair by hand, you are going to be chayiv. Says the Gemara, Tanra, I want to tar. Right, Torah says razor. Right, the pasuk is Kol Yimei Neder Nizro Tar Lo Ya'avor Al Rosho. So we'll say that's the pasuk. All the days of his nazirus, a razor should not come upon his head. Ad Melos Hayom Shayazar. Fine. So we'll say so. Torah just says so. Tanra Abanam Tar Emi Elatar. I only know that a nazir can't use a razor. Talash Mirat Sifseif Kol Shuminayin. So we'll say, how do I know talash? Which means literally again to pull out. Mirei. So we'll say, if you look by the way at the Rush actually defines these terms. The Rush says talash mirei to the shifseit, because I will say they all kind of sound synonymous. They all sound like a pulling out by hand. So the Rush says talash biad. So talash means to pull out by hand. Mirat besam. So we'll say mirei. It refers to a hair removal with a depilatory, a cream of some sort, right? Shif suf. Biyad ve'vira sar. So this is very interesting. So it seems to be, according to the Rosh, talash means pulling out by hand, but not necessarily the entire hair. Maybe just part of the hair. Let me do the bookends. As opposed to shifsuf, which means pulling out the entire hair. Mirate refers to hair removal with a depilatory. Okay, fine. Point of Rabbi is, I only know Torah tells me about a razor. Tar. How do I know that even if halacha l'maisa again, you remove the hair, full hair by hand, part of the hair by hand, remove hair with a depilatory, you're chayiv as well. Talmud Omer, the pasuk says, Kadosh yeh gadol pera se'arosho. So we'll say the pasuk says, Kadosh yeh, it will be sanctified, gadol pera se'arosho. Literally again, the growth of his hair. So the fact that the growth of the hair is kadosh, the Gemara's understanding means what? Torah is telling me that you cannot remove that hair with anything. Div Rabbi Yosher. We'll say these are Rabbi Yosher. So we'll say, just want to point out. So first drasha, and we'll say this is also one of these interesting drashas where once again, no one is arguing on the result, on the conclusion. What you're arguing about is how do we get there? So Rabbi Yosher says like this. Torah tells me Nazir can't use a razor. How do I know that Nazir can't use other forms of hair removal? Kadosh yeh gadol's pe'er sa'arosho. The fact that the hair is consecrated, is holy, that tells you cannot remove it anyway. Fine, Rabbi Yonasan says, tar, pasuk says razor, ainli elatar. I only know razor. Mirate, talash, sifseif kol shuhu, potter. Wow, okay. Rabbi Yonasan says, Torah tells me, tar, I only know that you can't use a razor, but if you go and you pull out a hair, right, I will say again, by hand, part of the hair, or the whole hair, depilatory, you're potter, because you didn't use a razor. I have a haksiv kadosh but the pasuk says, bless you, that the hair growth of a nazir should be kadosh. So I'll say, what does it mean? Lememra, di'im gilach le betar, koim alei, ba'asei v'lo sasei. So Rabbi say this is incredible. Rabbi Yonasan says, Rabbi Yonasan disagrees with Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yonasan says, no, the only time you're chayiv for removing hair is when? If you do so with a razor. But if you use any other means of hair removal, you will not be chayiv. But the pasuk says, Kadosh yihya, Kadosh yeh gadol pera sa'arosho, that the hair should be sanctified, which seems to indicate that you're not allowed to remove it through any means. So Rabbi Yonasan will say, no, what that teaches me is that if a Nazir does remove hair, Rabbi will say he's in violation of both an asay and what? And a lo saseh. I should say a lo saseh of tar lo yala arosho, and an asay, that's the last part of the pasuk. So I will say, so incredible. So just to see what's happening over fundamental machlokes, you have Rabbi Yoshia using the ultimate last part of the pasuk of gadol pera sa'arosho to teach me, or I should say, Kadosh Yihya, Gadol Pera Sa'arosho, to teach me that any form of hair removal is asar, and Rabbi Yonasan using it to teach me, the only type of hair removal that's asar midoraisa is what? Razor. What does the last part of the pasuk come to teach me? Because that if you remove hair, you're not only in violation of an asay, of a los asay, but also of an asay. Another brisa. Torah tells me razor, amy elatar. I only know that you can't use a razor. Talash, mirate, sif seif kol shuminai. How do I know that even if halach lamaisa, you go ahead and you remove it by hand or with the depilatory, that you're going to be chayiv? Talmud lomar lo ya'avar al rosho. Pasuk says, Rabbi is very interesting. According to this brisa, tar teaches me the prohibition of a razor. The phrase lo ya'avar al rosho comes to teach me what? All other forms of hair removal. So if you're going to say that hair removal is usher with everything, so why do you even have to mention razor? Just leave off razor, I will say. Leave it off. Right? And what would I infer if the Torah didn't say anything about if the Torah didn't say razor? What would I infer about hair removal? That any form will be usher. And if indeed any form is usher, why even mention razor at all? Lefi shelo lamandu lataglacha sachrona she'ehei batar. So I will say, so listen to this, because halacha l'maisa is fascinating. I will say, remember again, by Nazirus, there is a shaving, right? What's the shaving? The shaving is at the end of the Nazirus, right? What gets shaved? His head. And I will say, that shaving has to be done with a razor. How do I know that shaving gets done with a razor? How do you know that? To which the Gemara essentially says, the way that I know that ultimately is how? Through tar. Through the fact that the Torah goes out of its way to go ahead and tell me that a Nazir cannot use a razor on his head, tells you that it's during Nazirus that a razor can come upon his head. But what? At the conclusion of the Nazirus, dafka, it is done by a razor. Dafka done by a razor. So I will say, again, I'm going to leave you off over here in the middle of the drasha, just share with you a short vart on the parasha. So again, we're kind of leaving off middle of the drasha, but just to point out what we're leaving off with are these two dramatic ideas. Number one, this machlokes between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonasan. Rabbi Yoshia saying all forms of hair removal are problematic. Rabbi Yonasan telling me that no, it's only a razor. And now this second brisa that actually seems to support Rabbi Yoshia, all forms of hair removal are asur. So why does the Torah single out razor? To tell me that ultimately, again, as razor is used at the end of the Nazirite process. So I will say, Emir Hashem to be continued tomorrow. Share with you just a short vart.